They cut down 7 trees that had stood on my property longer than most of the people in town had been alive. 2 weeks later, I locked the only road leading into their luxury neighborhood. If that sounds petty, stick around, because by the end of this story, I'm still not completely sure whether I was defending my property or feeding a grudge that had been building for years. My name is Grant Holloway, and this happened just outside a small town in western Tennessee, in a valley where everybody pretends to mind their own business while secretly knowing exactly what everyone else is doing. The morning everything started felt painfully ordinary. I was sitting at my desk in the maintenance office of a manufacturing plant, halfway through a cold roast beef sandwich, trying to avoid a spreadsheet that seemed determined to ruin my day. Then my younger sister, Brooke, called. Now Brooke and I talk often, but not during work hours. If she calls before 5 o'clock, something is wrong. I answered and said, "What's going on?" For a second, I didn't hear anything except wind. Then I heard her breathing. Not crying, not panicking, just that strange breathing people do when they're trying very hard not to panic. "Grant," she said, "you need to come home." I sat up immediately. "What happened?" "Just come home." "Brooke, please." That one word was enough. I grabbed my keys, told my supervisor there was a family emergency, and headed out before he could ask questions. The drive home normally took about 35 minutes. That day felt like 3 hours. You know how sometimes you can feel something is wrong before you actually see it? Like when you walk into your house and instantly know somebody moved the furniture. That's how it felt when I turned onto Old Creek Road. Something was missing. Something important. Then I saw it. 7 massive oak trees that lined the western edge of my property were gone. Not damaged. Not trimmed. Gone. Just 7 fresh stumps sitting in the dirt like somebody had erased 40 years of history with a chainsaw. I pulled onto the shoulder so hard I nearly slid into a ditch. My chest felt hollow. Those trees weren't just trees. My grandfather planted the first 4 when my dad was a teenager. The others came years later. Every birthday party, every family cookout, every Thanksgiving football game in the backyard happened under those branches. When my father died, I sat beneath those trees alone for hours because it was the only place that felt quiet enough to think. Now they were gone. I got out of my truck and walked toward the stumps. Fresh sawdust still covered the ground. The cuts were clean. Professional. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Brooke was standing near the fence line with her arms folded. The second she saw me, she shook her head. I tried to stop them. "You still here." "What do you mean you tried to stop them?" She pointed toward the ridge above my property. "You know that fancy subdivision up there?" I knew exactly which one. Ridgeview Summit. Huge homes. Perfect lawns. The kind of neighborhood where every mailbox looked like it cost more than my first car. Brooke explained that 2 trucks showed up around 10 that morning. Tree service company. Hard hats. Safety vests. Chainsaws. She walked over and asked what they were doing. One of the workers told her they had a work order from the Ridgeview Summit Homeowners Association. I laughed. Then I guess the community should have asked permission first. For a second, I thought she might actually listen. Then she smiled. That same smile. The one that always showed up right before she said something ridiculous. "You won't do anything." I remember that sentence clearly because it turned out to be the biggest mistake she made. Not the trespassing. Not the assumptions. Not even the wedding itself. It was believing I wouldn't act. I didn't argue anymore. I just pulled out my phone and started recording. The workers, the decorations, the vehicles, the holes they dug, the cables running through my pasture. Everything. Vanessa noticed. "What are you doing?" "Creating memories." She rolled her eyes and walked away. That evening I drove into town. The sun was setting behind the hills, and the entire situation felt surreal. Part of me kept expecting somebody to call and apologize. Nobody did. Instead, I stopped by the county records office. Now, the woman who worked there, Martha, had known my family forever. When I explained why I needed the property maps, she nearly dropped her coffee. She did what? That's what I'm trying to tell you. Martha printed every parcel map she could find. Boundary records, survey documents, ownership history, everything. By the time I left, I had enough paperwork to stop a bullet. Next stop was Sheriff Daniel Brooks. Daniel and I weren't close friends exactly, but we'd known each other for years. He listened quietly while I explained the situation. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Vanessa Holloway. Unfortunately." He rubbed his forehead. She's been keeping my deputies busy for years. That didn't surprise me. What are my options? Legally? Legally. He shrugged. It's your land. That's what I thought. You can remove people from it, even if they're having a wedding. Daniel laughed. A wedding doesn't create property rights. That answer was all I needed. I drove home feeling calmer than I had all day. Not because the problem was solved, because I finally understood something. I wasn't trapped. Vanessa had convinced herself she was operating from a position of strength. In reality, she was standing on very thin ice. The moment somebody challenged her assumptions, the whole thing could collapse. When I got back to the ranch, the wedding venue was glowing in the darkness. Strings of lights hung from poles. Music played softly through speakers. Workers were still making adjustments. It looked beautiful. Honestly, it did, which somehow made the whole thing even more insulting. I sat on my porch with my dog Cooper beside me and watched them work. After a while, Cooper rested his head on my boot. I scratched behind his ears. You know what's funny, buddy? He looked at me. I would have probably said yes if she'd asked. And that was true. Maybe not for free. Maybe not without conditions. But if Vanessa had come to me like a normal human being and explained that her daughter wanted a wedding with mountain views and open fields, I probably would have worked something out. Instead, she chose arrogance. People underestimate how expensive arrogance can become. Around 10 o'clock that night, I walked into my equipment barn. Moonlight filtered through the old wooden slats. The smell of hay and diesel filled the air. My tractor sat exactly where I'd left it. Behind it was something even more interesting. A manure spreader, recently filled, ready for use. Now, before anybody gets the wrong idea, I wasn't standing there plotting revenge. At least not yet. I was just looking, thinking, considering options. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Not because of an alarm, because my brain wouldn't shut off. I stepped onto the porch and looked toward the wedding site. The fog sat low across the pasture. Everything was quiet, almost peaceful. Then I noticed something. Nobody had removed a single thing. Not one chair, not one table, not one decoration. Vanessa hadn't taken my warning seriously. She genuinely believed she could force reality to agree with her. That realization changed everything. I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the sun begin climbing over the horizon. The golden light spread across the field, across the tents, across the expensive decorations, across every square inch of property that belonged to me. And suddenly I stopped feeling angry. I started feeling certain. There is a huge difference. Angry people make mistakes. Certain people make decisions. I finished my coffee, walked to the barn, started the tractor. The engine roared to life with that familiar deep rumble I've heard since I was a kid. Cooper followed me outside. The old dog seemed unusually interested in where I was going. Maybe he sensed something. Maybe he was just being a dog. Either way, he trotted alongside the fence while I drove toward the field. The closer I got, the more absurd everything looked. Rows of white chairs, fresh flowers, elegant table settings, crystal glassware, thousands and thousands of dollars sitting on land the organizers didn't own. I stopped at the edge of the venue, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment. Not because I was hesitating, because I was thinking about consequences. That's something people rarely talk about. Standing up for yourself sounds simple until you're actually faced with a choice. Part of me wanted to walk away. Part of me wanted to avoid the conflict. Part of me wanted somebody else to solve the problem. But boundaries don't protect themselves. Eventually, somebody has to defend them. And if the person responsible won't do it, nobody will. I looked across the venue one final time. Then I glanced at the attached spreader behind me. The same equipment I used every year. The same equipment currently loaded with several tons of very natural fertilizer. At that exact moment, a catering van appeared at the far end of the access road. More people were arriving. The wedding day had officially begun. I took a slow breath, put my hand on the control lever, and finally made my decision. Because if Vanessa wanted to treat my ranch like a working farm one day and community property the next, then maybe it was time to remind everybody exactly what a working farm really looked like. And trust me, the next 30 minutes will become local legend. The funny thing about consequences is they usually arrive looking a lot different than people expect. I eased the tractor forward. Slow, steady, no ruse, no drama. Just a rancher doing ranch work on ranch land. The spreader rattled behind me as I rolled toward the first row of chairs. The morning sun was just breaking over the hills, turning everything gold. For a brief second, the venue looked like something out of a movie. Then reality showed up. I reached for the lever, pulled it, and the world changed. The machine came alive with a roar. A thick wave of fertilizer launched into the air and landed directly across the near section of white chairs. The effect was immediate. White fabric turned brown. Fresh flowers disappeared beneath splatters. Tablecloths sagged. Centerpieces collapsed. I kept driving. Slow circles. Methodical. Deliberate. Every pass transformed another section of the venue from luxury wedding destination back into what it had always been, a working ranch. The smell arrived seconds later. Now, if you've never spent time around livestock, it's difficult to explain. Farm fertilizer isn't subtle. It doesn't politely introduce itself. It kicks down the front door and announces its presence to the entire county. By the time I finished, the venue looked like a battlefield between Pinterest and agriculture. I parked the tractor, shut off the engine, and climbed down. The silence afterward was almost beautiful. I walked over to the wedding sign. Welcome to the Holloway wedding. I stared at it for a moment. Then I stuck a smaller handwritten sign beneath it. Private property. Permission matters. That felt appropriate. I snapped photographs from every angle. The decorations, the field, the boundary markers, everything. Then I returned to my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and waited. The first victims weren't the wedding guests. They were the caterers. A delivery truck pulled into the field. 2 workers stepped out smiling. Then the smell hit. One guy froze. The other guy physically staggered backward. They looked at each other, looked at the venue, looked at the venue again, then climbed back into the truck and left without unloading a single item. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. The florist arrived next. Same reaction. Then the photographer. Then the DJ. By 8:30, the parade of confusion had become genuinely entertaining. And then came the main event. A line of luxury vehicles appeared at the end of the road. The bridal party, the guests, the family, and leading the convoy like a queen arriving at her coronation. Vanessa. Her SUV stopped near the entrance. She stepped out wearing a designer dress and an expression of absolute confidence. For approximately 4 seconds. Then the wind shifted. I watched her face change. First confusion, then concern, then horror. The bride climbed out behind her. A beautiful young woman who, to be fair, had done absolutely nothing wrong in this story. She took one look at the field and burst into tears. The groom stepped out. He said something I won't repeat on YouTube. Vanessa spun in circles, trying to process what she was seeing. Then her eyes found me, sitting peacefully on my porch, coffee in hand. Watching, she started marching across the pasture. Unfortunately for her, expensive shoes and ranch land have never gotten along. Halfway there, one heel sank into the ground. She stumbled, recovered, and kept coming. You did this. I took another sip. Morning, Vanessa. You destroyed my daughter's wedding. No, I shook my head. I fertilized my field. For a second, I thought steam might actually come out of her ears. Guests were gathering nearby now, watching. Listening, whispering. Vanessa pointed toward the ruined venue. Do you have any idea how much money this cost? Do you have any idea how much land costs? That one landed. I could see it. Her face tightened. The crowd got quieter. Then she made her biggest mistake of the entire morning. She started threatening lawsuits, police, arrests, criminal charges, the whole performance. I listened patiently. Then I pulled out my phone. Would you like to hear something interesting? Without waiting for an answer, I pressed play. Her voice filled the air, clear as day. This area is basically community space. It's not like you're using it today. The crowd went silent. Nobody said a word. You could practically hear people recalculating their opinions in real time. That's when another vehicle arrived. Sheriff Daniel Brooks. He stepped out, looked at the venue, looked at Vanessa, looked at me, then looked back at the venue. His expression did something very interesting. It twitched, like he was trying extremely hard not to laugh. Vanessa practically sprinted toward him. He ruined everything. Daniel nodded slowly. I can see that. Arrest him. For what? She blinked. What do you mean for what? Daniel folded his arms. Ma'am, whose property is this? She didn't answer. Mom. Her silence answered for her. Daniel turned toward me. You got documentation? I handed him the folder. Property maps, survey records, ownership documents, everything. He spent less than a minute reviewing it, then handed it back. Looks pretty straightforward. Vanessa looked stunned. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious. Daniel pointed toward the field. That belongs to him. Then he pointed toward the wedding decorations. Those belonged somewhere else. The entire fight ended right there. Not with yelling, not with threats, not with revenge, with reality. One by one, the guests started leaving. The DJ packed up. The caterers disappeared. The photographers vanished. The groom's family left first. The bride eventually climbed back into the limousine. Honestly, I felt bad for her. She wasn't the villain. She was collateral damage in a battle created by someone else's ego. By noon, the field was quiet again. Just me, my ranch, and a very expensive lesson sitting in the sun. The aftermath was even crazier. Somebody uploaded a video, then another, then 10 more. Within days, the story spread across the county, then the state, then far beyond. Vanessa's position inside the HOA became impossible to defend. Residents started asking questions. Board members started distancing themselves. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly found their voices. 3 weeks later, she resigned. A month after that, she moved away. And just like that, the woman who spent years trying to control everyone else's property lost control of her own reputation. Funny how life works. The strangest part came months later. A new HOA president stopped by my ranch. Nice guy. Brought homemade pie. Actually apologized. We sat on the porch talking while the sun went down. At one point, he looked across the pasture and said something I've never forgotten. I think we stopped being neighbors and started acting like owners. That sentence stuck with me, because ownership isn't really the point. Respect is. The field eventually recovered. Grass grew back thicker than ever. The cattle returned. Life moved on. But every now and then someone still asks if I regret what happened. And honestly, I don't know. I regret that it reached that point. I regret that common sense never got a chance. I regret that a young bride lost her wedding venue because her mother couldn't hear the word no. But do I regret defending my boundaries? No, not for a second. And that's the question I'd love to ask you. If someone ignored your rights, walked onto your property, and acted like your voice didn't matter, would you have handled it differently? Was I justified? Did Vanessa get exactly what she deserved? Or did I go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to hear where you stand. If you've ever dealt with an overbearing HOA, a power-hungry neighbor, or someone who thought they could make rules for your life, share your story. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next story. Because out here, the fences aren't always the only things separating people from trouble.